its kind built in Los Angeles in 100 years, right? And so it had to sort of match the ambition of sort of being in the middle of the entertainment capital of the world, and be substantial enough to draw the biggest events of the world. So in Los Angeles, we had not hosted a Super Bowl in over 20 years, right? We were sort of routinely passed by for the biggest events that would come to the US, because that facility did not exist. So the ambition from our owner was very much to build not just a stadium, but a stadium that was fit for purpose for Los Angeles in the 21st century. And that's sort of what I walked into really on day one. And yeah, I have described it as that pretty much everything we did from a technology standpoint was either the largest in the world or the first in the world. And that goes from sort of the basic infrastructure and what you need to operate a building like that. The building is enormous. It is, well, let me see, that's over 3 million square feet. So what is that? That's over 300,000 square meters, I think. And as an example, there's a beautiful NFL stadium in Minnesota for the Vikings, designed by the same architect. Our stadium is twice the size of that stadium, even though it holds the same amount of people. And so it's very much designed as a hospitality and entertainment building from the beginning. But my job was to make sure that the technology that we put into it, both from an infrastructure standpoint, would serve us well, because we very much had a 2028 goal in mind as far as the initial investment. We wanted to make sure would carry us towards the Olympics. And then obviously create a very unique fan or guest experience on top of it, so that SoFi Stadium and events in SoFi Stadium are just fundamentally different than in other stadiums.
From an outcomes perspective, you know, of the new stadium and the technology environment that you've created, what have been some of the sort of the benefits for the owner, the hirers, the team, and your venue partners? Because I know venue partners is a big part of what you do.
Yeah, I mean, there's layers to it, and of course, and one of the things that we unfortunately, like many of us in this room, had to deal with is that we were building and opening the stadium during COVID, right? And there was a silver lining, although, and that silver lining was that we had very much designed the building to be a traditional, paper ticket, a traditional cash register building that during COVID we made a complete 180 turn, and we decided that the infrastructure would be completely digital and frictionless. And so that very much in retrospect was a blessing in disguise. I think there was a concern at the time that our audience wasn't ready for it. That concern ended up not materializing. People very much appreciated the sort of frictionless nature of digital ticketing, of point of sale that was, touchless and cashless. Really, we basically did away with all sort of hard currency in the building as well. And so that infrastructure, I think, helped operationally a lot. We have subsequently, continued to fine-tune things like our entry policies, our security infrastructure as to how we scan people from a security standpoint to increase that throughput. And then obviously the benefit of a building like that, which is designed really for premium experiences and hospitality. We have 260 boxes in the building. We have around 18,000 what we call club seats. So it's from a financial standpoint, it's been an absolutely fantastic experience for the the teams and the events that come through, right? There's more higher level inventory available in that building than pretty much any other building in the US. And so it has been both operationally and financially incredibly successful.
And specifically the ramps, the LA ramps, how have they benefited from the technology environment that you've created?
Yeah, and for those of you not familiar with the backstory, the Rams are an old NFL club franchise that was based in Los Angeles for decades. And then about 20 years ago or so, it was moved from Los Angeles to St. Louis. And then after our owner acquired the majority stake in the team, his ambition was to move it back to Los Angeles, assuming we could build the right home for the team, which he was able to do. And I think certainly from the club perspective, the value of the club, the value of the experience for our fans is just enormous, right? It's hard to describe how impactful that transformation is for the club. To go from an aging facility in St. Louis to a very, very modern facility in Los Angeles was transformative, right? Not just for our fans, but for the club as well. And so I think we very much have a DNA of being innovators, and in some aspects we want to push the boundaries of both what happens on the field through our gameplay, but also how the club engages our fans both at the game and in the community.
And obviously it's a major undertaking to build a stadium of such stature. What do you think were the sort of keys to success in terms of the development process?
Yeah, I think, and this is, I often get asked about this because of the structure that happens in these mega developments, is that I think the thing that worked really well for us is that I was on site, on the construction site, very early in the process, and I represented the owner, right? My job, as I described it, was to make sure that the day that the building opened, that the owner and the tenants had the technology as was envisioned, right? And that job is incredibly important. And my first advice to anybody that's going to do a build or a redevelopment of an existing venue is to make sure that you have somebody that looks after technology from day one, that's on the construction site, that's in every single meeting, that understands the dynamic of the construction schedule and understands how the general contractor and the subcontractors are basically bidding out the various scopes, and B, there to engage directly with designers like WJHW, who designed this amazing audiovisual experience for us. You have to be there, and you have to make your own decisions as to how you think this is all going to work. Because I like to say that the day you open the doors, all of the architects and the engineers and the construction people, they have moved on. They are on to their next job, and you are sort of left with operating that building, and you have to be very clear and very sure that you're getting basically what you envisioned and what you paid for. And so I think having a technology team that was independent of vendors, that was independent of the general contractor, was very successful. But you have to be there every day, and you have to make a concerted effort to insert yourself into all of those conversations.
And how do you think, you had 18 years, in the entertainment industry.
Yeah.
How do you think that influenced you personally influence the outcome here?
Yeah, I sort of wonder about this a lot, right? Because I had no construction experience. I had never been on a mega construction site like that. I really didn't have any IT experience, if you believe it, because I was always sort of traditional IT. I was always consumer facing. I built consumer products, if you will. And my world was very much colored from a software design standpoint rather than sort of what I would call traditional technology infrastructure. So it's another way of saying I had a lot to learn, right? And the way that I went about it is that, to my earlier point, I just forced myself into all those conversations. And I very much built my knowledge base from the ground up so that I could become an expert in the things that I really hadn't had an exposure before. And that goes from what we would call traditional technology and structural wiring infrastructure to networking infrastructure to broadcast infrastructure, all the way up the stack to what we would call the application layer, which I felt very much at home, right? But all of the other things, and they all layer up in success. And so I think in retrospect, the fact that I didn't have preconceived notions about how this should work is that I ended up sort of questioning pretty much everything, right? And I didn't take necessarily for granted the designs that I was being handed. And I very much asked the question, when we open in 3 years' time, is this design that I'm being presented with, is this the right design that we want to have? And in many cases it was not. And there is a number of reasons for that. But you have to be in a position to say, okay, that's not how I think it should be done. And this is something that we need to change during the design process. And I'll give you a quick example. That screen that we saw, it's the height of a 4-story building. It weighs about 1,000 metric tons. It is still to this day, when I walk into the stadium, I still can't believe we pulled it off, right? It's absolutely stunning. But I realized sort of during the design process that I wasn't happy with the resolution of the screen. And one of the things that and my reasoning was that it could be crisper, and I also didn't want to be in a position of having to upgrade basically the visual elements for the design, as the sort of quality of cameras and everything else started to become a reality. And so I lobbied for and ultimately was successful in doubling the resolution of the screen, which meant that we have twice as many lights. So think of a light as basically, it's an LED, it's the thing that's on the back of your phone that creates the light. We have 80 million of those up there, right, instead of 40 million. And so that doubled the power draw of the board, which meant that it now draws at peak about 3.5 megawatts of power. And I said, that's sort of like a small Midwestern town in America. And so there's these knock-on effects, right? But it was ultimately the right thing to do because we will never have to upgrade that board for quality because the human eye can't discern a higher resolution than what we have. It's basically a 4K resolution, and as part of that, we partnered with WJHW and we designed the world's first native 4K video production facility to pair it with.
And I guess, from an outsider looking in, I think that's so important. I've had the privilege of actually being at one of the Rams games and seeing that. And, the technology is so much part of the experience that if you hadn't have done that, you ran the risk that it actually would detract, right, from the game if you didn't lift it to the level that it was actually part of the entertainment experience, yeah?
Yeah, and I very much call it an experience engine, which is hardware. And we turn that hardware to our creative folks. And it's really their job, as we saw in that video, to find that balance of how to use it. And it's absolutely stunning to see that creative process sort of play itself out now. And you know, we will be going into our third season there. And how the audience, how the fans have reacted to the things that we've designed into like how we present the game. And we call it the show. We put on a presentation for a football game. So as an example, we have over 80 broadcast professionals that all they do is create content for that big screen on game day. So we run a completely separate broadcast live production facility in addition to the television broadcasters that are in the building. And to see the fans now react to that and to anticipate things that we're going to do has been really, really rewarding. And the bit that we started with, we call them moments or rituals. And it is now something that the fans look forward to. And they're like, oh, let's not go for a beer because we are expecting in the third quarter that the team is going to play this ritual and we want to be in the bowl to see it. And then we can talk about the impact of that to the bottom line, to revenue as well, because we very much turn that capability into a revenue generating engine for the club as well.
And I guess, you know, one of the things that you'd said to me previously was that you actually involved the team, your commercial part, you know, your commercial entities, your partners, the whole industry in the design and development process. And I guess from my perspective, I see you need to do that, one, to get the outcome, but two, to get them to ultimately buy in and deliver that great content that we saw, because that's a challenge.
Yeah, it's really interesting dynamic because SoFi is such a unicorn, right? That like, if I go to a brand like Anheuser-Busch or Corona beer, and who are both of our partners, and I said, well, we need you in this period to activate the stadium. We need you to activate your brand. And they sort of just dust off their old plans from another stadium. And we were like, well, that doesn't work, right? You have to take advantage of this engine, right? And to get them over that hump was much harder than I anticipated, right? Because you know, the creative agencies that they hired, you know, they're sort of, wow, we want to get this job out the door as quickly as possible. And it was really interesting because it was actually a Native American casino that was one of our partners. And they had an in-house team that were absolute geniuses at basically LED advertising. As you can imagine, casinos, they do a lot of display work in the casino. And so they delivered like the state-of-the-art sponsorship message. We call them 360-degree takeovers. It means that the entire building is now branded for your brand. That is the big screen. It's all we call them the fascia boards. I think you call them something different here. The bowl facing.
Yeah, the ribbon boards.
The ribbon boards. And then we have 3,000 televisions around the stadium. And at that precise moment, every single square inch of display turns into that brand message, right? And so they absolutely put the big brands to shame. And we would just like point them at, this is how you should go do it. And then, you know, they got gradually better. And the sponsorship messages are now engaging content that people, you know, react to.
If you had your time again, is there anything that you would do differently or do the same?
I think one of the
share with the audience.
Yeah, the one thing that I always mention to folks that are starting this journey, and there's a number of these projects that are starting now in the US, is that don't take anything for granted, right? Don't specifically when it comes to technology, be present, like ask questions, and no matter sort of how sort of niche or small you think a subsystem that goes into your stadium is going to be, just make sure that you're paying attention to it, and because there's a profound impact of getting it wrong, right? One is that it's financially very difficult to replace something like that, but operationally you end up paying the price if you don't do that. And we had a couple of examples of that where, in retrospect, you know, those systems, and they were sort of, you know, smaller systems that you would think that were just a check mark on a ledger, but something that we should have been paying more attention to, and we should have asked the same sort of questions about as the big systems, as the network infrastructure that our friends at Cisco built with us, or the broadcast capability that WJHW designed for us. Like, don't make the mistake of assuming that that everything is going to be perfect just because it was designed and presented to you in such a way.
So for many of us in the audience, we would look at SoFi Stadium and we'd look at the budgets spent. I don't know if people know this, but somewhere in the order of $5 billion. And just feel that is completely out of reach for us here in Australia or in APAC region. Is there anything about, what technology would you say is non-negotiable?
Yeah.
Must have?
I think, and you know, it's our friends at Samsung, they talk about this a lot because they obviously bring clients to see, and people sort of discount it, right? Like, oh, you know, it's like, we're never going to build that. Why should I go see it, right? I think it's an interesting laboratory in many ways for the technology decisions that we made. And I'll point to one specifically, which is the networking infrastructure that I partnered with Cisco on. You know, the design I was handed was, in my opinion, very strange. There was 5 different manufacturers in this single networking design. And so I went to Cisco and like, how would you guys do it? Like, if you had the power to design a building like that from a networking architecture standpoint, how would you do it? And it was very, very different than the design that I was handed originally. And Cisco now today, they don't bring only venue operators to see the network at SoFi Stadium. They bring hospital operators, they bring, you know, conference facilities, they bring school districts, etc. Because the core sort of design principles that we put into what's called the converged network and a hyper-converged infrastructure, we did things like we virtualized all of the systems. We were due to rack over 100 physical servers into our data center. We basically, and the servers, they control everything from the lighting systems to the audio systems to the security systems, basic, you know, building fundamentals. And we collapsed all of that into a virtual environment, which had never apparently been done in a venue before, certainly not in the US. But to me, not knowing any better, I was like, why wouldn't you do that? Like, that just, from a cybersecurity standpoint, from a management perspective, like down the road when all of you are gone and we have to manage all of these applications, let's do it. So today the stadium runs, you know, with 130 virtual machines that sort of control everything in the building. I think it's learnings like that, how we designed the networks to be resilient and how we designed them to be secure. Which is one of the, like, hosting a Super Bowl is in many ways very, very painful. And it's like the old joke about like your two most favorite days is that my favorite day was when it was announced that we got the Super Bowl, and my second most favorite day was the day that they were out of there, right? It was, it's like, yes, thank you, enough. But I joke about that, but one of the things that what happened is that we had the Cybersecurity and Information Security Agency of the federal government in our kitchen for 2 weeks, basically trying to hack our networks from the inside and from the outside in. And it was, there's nothing like a bunch of G-men sort of bringing trolleys of equipment into a conference room and sort of closing the door behind them and say, we'll talk to you all later, right? So going through that, which validated the assumptions that we had in building those networks, was great, but those learnings apply to any size of project, right? Wireless technology is another one. Wireless is basically like running water now. You have to have it because the mobile phone is such a key part of both how you operationalize the building, but also how you engage the fans. But it is one of the most difficult things we did on that job was we put an enormous amount of RF into that stadium. We built the largest distributed antenna system in the world. We have basically every frequency, including mid-band and millimeter wave 5G in that building. And of all of the things we did, including that enormous screen, trying to fit that infrastructure was one of the most difficult things we did. And it's another one of these learnings that I have, which is very much if you're thinking about retrofitting or if you're thinking about building a new facility, you have to start thinking about that fundamental technology infrastructure in the same way you think about basically electrical distribution or plumbing, right, or mechanical, HVAC, etc. Technology needs to be the sort of the next layer, and it has to be designed organically into the building to fit all of it, right? And it's very hard to overlay that much RF into an environment. You're going to end up, it's going to end up looking like a Christmas tree because you have these antennas and radios everywhere. But the properties of RF distribution are going to be such that it's not going to be optimized. But you can address many of those things in the design period. So those are important things.
And anything that you can do on a shoestring? On a shoestring budget?
Yeah, I think it sort of depends on, and we've talked about this a lot, like the culture and the expectations that your fans have that come to visit your venue, because I'm a massive English Premier League football fan. I've been a fan of Arsenal Football Club for 43 years, right? I love the experience of going to Emirates Stadium and that sort of traditional football experience, which I think is very much like the experience that we saw yesterday at the AFL game. And then I sort of put my Rams hat on and I completely flipped to the other side, which is like, this is so much better, right? Like, why wouldn't we always engage our fans like this? But I have this sort of battle with myself about the sort of traditional side of it and the what I would call the entertainment overlay on top of the sports presentation. And there's no right answer to that, by the way. But if you want to swing more towards the sort of American model of engaging your fans in a much more impactful way, you have to invest. You have to invest in technology. You don't have to do sort of everything that we did, but you have to start thinking about that your event is live production. You have to start thinking about it like you are producing a television show and not just putting on a sporting event, right? and that's how we do it. Now you can do that with 13 cameras and 80 people in a 4K live production facility, or you can do that with 2 cameras and a guy on a switcher, and at the end of the day, it's a creative process, right? And you sort of put into it what you can, right? But it's also a cultural question of like, how far in that direction do you want to swing? And like I said, there's no wrong or right answer there. But if you do, then you have to sort of look towards what we're doing in the US as the model, right? But it might not be fit for purpose for all venues.
No, appreciate that. Moving forward, what do you think are the next big technology trends for, stadiums, venues?
Yeah, one of the sort of core concepts that I had when we were designing is that I wanted the stadium to be basically thought of as a platform, that it had these inert capabilities as a baseline, and then really how you activate the platform, what kind of applications you put on top of it was how you would differentiate it. And so that's not novel, that sort of happens, in everything that we do when it comes to technology. Whereas in a stadium, you have sort of this physical element to it, of course, as well. But we want to continue to evolve the guest experience from one season to another, and introduce new elements. And I'll give you guys a quick example. So Snap Inc., which produces Snapchat, the application, they are 15 minutes away from us in Los Angeles. And they have this feature called the Lens, which allows you to sort of superimpose characters or faces on your friends. The kids love it. Don't ask me how it works. We approach them and say, could you do something like that in stadium? Instead of using a phone, could we just take our broadcast camera and could we pan into our fans, into the crowd, and then you sit on the back end and you superimpose a face on the fans, and then we put that on the big board. This is an interactive element that we do. And so they built us a box, basically, that goes into our broadcast routing fabric that we have. And it allows us to engage with the fans in a very, very interesting way. And it is an absolute runaway hit, right? And it is very simple. It can basically be replicated in any stadium that has a screen like the one behind us here and a camera, right? And but what ends up happening is that we do that to engage the fans, but we also do it to differentiate ourselves for our sponsors. So we did an avatar activation where we did this massive sort of takeover for the release of Avatar, the movie with Walt Disney. And we created Avatar snap lenses. And so when we panned into the crowd, it was basically a collection of Avatar characters that was presented back to us, right? And they were fully animated, right? And people would like look up and see themselves, and they were like, what is going on? And that is a very visceral thing, but it's also one of these things that we do in America that I, for example, didn't experience yesterday, right? This idea that we that are producing this event, that we would actively engage the fans in that way, right? But that is something that you could do. And so what we're doing now is we're taking that to the next level for this upcoming season, right? And so, think about, fully animated characters that are engaging with the fans, etc. It's very much a stepping stone into what I think is the sort of coming revolution, which is augmented reality, and what happens when you're starting to see the investment from Apple and Google and Meta in augmented reality hardware that's actually presentable, when it looks more like, you know, my glasses than like this big helmet that you have to wear. But we certainly think that that day is coming. I don't know if it's going to be 1 year, 2 year, 5 years, but it's one of these things that we should probably pay attention to, and we should start understanding how we would use it, both for, not just for entertainment, but also for information purposes, for the game that's being played.
And I can tell you that snap technology, you don't want to be on the losing side or on the opposing side when you're in the Rams stadium.
Yeah, so we do this bit when, like, after we score or after we've won a game, we pan into the visiting fans, and we put like a crying face on the bit. So they like can't, they're like looking at, why am I crying? I'm not crying. It's like, and so we play around with that a little bit. So yeah, it's one of these things that people are just really drawn to. It's fun.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Skarpi, for sharing your thoughts and deep insight around technology. What we might do, I think we've got 5 minutes left, and Jared's going to start to become dangerous and throw balls around. We'll throw to the audience for some questions, if there's any questions in the audience. Go on.
There we go. Skarpi, with the platform that you've got, with the bandwidth and everything, and being knowledgeable about SoFi Stadium, talk about the app that you have and other apps, I'm sure, that is wayfinding. You've got it so that you can get from point A to point B, and it includes all the vertical transportation and best way to get there, et cetera. If you could talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. And by the way, that's an Australian company that we used for that. PAM, they're actually outside. Make sure you say hello to Stephen. It's a big and complex building. It's 8 concourse floors, right? Most stadiums have 1, 2, or 3 concourse floors. We have 8, and it's difficult to navigate if you haven't been there before. Even if you've been there 10 times, it's difficult. And so I personally have struggled with like the right. Think of it if it's a sliding scale of like having no digital experience to having almost like a Walt Disney World type curated fan journey experience. Where should that slider be for sports, right? It's still a working thing for me. I'm not exactly sure. And I think it depends a little bit on the sport and the event and what you're trying to do, because in my view, it's very hard to change people's behaviors. And if you've been going to the football for 20 years, you have a ritual of your own, and you like to follow that ritual with friends and family, etc. And far be it from us to sort of try to insert ourselves into it, beyond sort of making your entry into the stadium and your transactions interesting. But there's also other events, like where everybody is new to the event. Olympics are a good example, or one-off sporting events. Like I went to the European football championships in 2016 in France when Iceland was playing. And I saw the value in that sort of curated fan journey for a city, a venue that I had never been to. And so like, tell me how to get there, tell me how to get in, show me the way around, etc. That I think is very impactful if it's done right, and certainly our partners at PAM helped us do that. And then we also have sort of this enviable advantage of not really having to use the mobile phone to engage the fans during the game with information and content, etc. Because we have this enormous experience engine, right, that sits above the field, and so we put our effort into engaging them there. We do some interactive stuff with mobile phones and we will do more of that going forward. But it's not the primary mechanism of like, oh, I want to know what's going on around the league. I want to see a replay of this particular play, etc. So the first thing that you have to do to sort of get to your question is that you have to have that infrastructure. You have to have the platform. You have to be able to, if you wanted to, have every single fan in the building rely on their mobile phone. Certainly if you're going to use it for entry, if you're going to use it for concession transactions, etc. So that's a fundamental thing you have to have on the platform.
Is there any more questions for Skarpi? I think we've got a couple of minutes left.
Hi, thanks for that, Skarpi. I'm still back on, you don't want to leave the bowl to go and get a beer. So how do you get a beer if you don't want to leave the bowl? Is there any innovation there in the technology?
Yeah, this is like,
stand
man,
yeah.
if I could count the number of meetings I've participated in to decide whether we should do in-seat delivery or not. Like, it's interesting, like, the back and forth you go into as you design a building like that. And again, there's really no right or wrong answer. It really comes down to economics, right? Do you think that you can run a service like that, let's say delivery to the seat, in an economic way? Will the patrons pay for the privilege of getting food delivered to your seat? We do not do it at SoFi Stadium today. It doesn't mean that we won't. We sort of built all of the capabilities into the stadium. It's very much up to our concession company to sort of activate that capability. We actually built in all the pathways into our app, and we had sort of all of this ready to go. And then sort of at the final decision cycle was like, you know what? It does not make economic sense for us to have the labor basically needed to run this into everyone that wants to do it. So it's not a technology question. As long as you have that platform, as you have those capabilities, you can turn it on. But we have elected not to. So the beer, you have to go and collect it.
But I think that possibly comes back to your earlier statement about the level of hospitality within the stadium. Like it's on a new level compared to probably some of the stadiums we would be, you know, within this room we'd be thinking about.
Yeah, it's. I think I've described it as almost like a resort with a postage-sized, you know, field that we play games on, because it was very much designed to deliver food and beverage and a hospitality experience, and how you activate that, we sort of leave that up to the tenants, to the event that comes in, but by and large, our philosophy, certainly at the Rams, is to be more high touch, have more personalized experiences. So in our suites, we have stewards in the suites that take orders, that engage with the customer, etc., rather than sort of order on a tablet. And that's just a sort of experience design decision that we made.
Well, Skarpi, thank you very much for your thoughts and insights today. Thank you, audience, for listening. I think Skarpi will be around for most of the day, so I would welcome any further questions or discussions over the day. And we wish you well for a fantastic conference ahead.
Yeah, thank you all.
Thank you very much to Kym Shilton and to Skarpi Hedinsson as well. That was outstanding to listen to. For those of you who do have Snapchat or your kids have it, have you seen how these